Right? Awesome. So, thanks everyone for coming. My name is Milos Brzakovic, and for the past 6 years, I've been working in Microsoft Maps with special focus of integration of OSM and the project in the OSM ecosystem. As mentioned here, my focus in the previous 3 years is mainly front-end developer, and so let's start. The topic of today is we're here to openly share the learnings from developing Microsoft's map builder, and with a special focus on the UX or on the UI. And so what we will talk today, first I will introduce what map builder was, the key challenges of the map builder project, and the solution pillars that try or attempt to solve the key challenge. And so the solution pillars are here. So we wanted to make a UI that's simple and minimal. We took special care of how do we onboard and educate users to the web app. And I will be talking about our approach to the editing tools and to the drawing. And the two facts that mapping is engaging and fun, and that mapping is with and for a community. I will, of course, elaborate on each one of these. And finally, I will share some designs for the mobile map editing. So, first, what was Map Builder? How many of you have heard of Map Builder? Raise hands if you have. Okay. So, essentially, it's a web app-based editor, and it's a maps editor, and it's built on top of the ID editor, and you can find more information in this OSM wiki link. And so, what is the main idea? I mean, why build another map editor? How is this different than everything else? So, we wanted to really lower down the barrier for mapping. So this is aimed at users that are usually first-time contributors that have no prior expertise to the mapping whatsoever. And so we had the idea to sort of bring this closer to the Bing users and the Bing ecosystems, and the Bing users would improve the Bing maps by improving the OSM data. As we mentioned in our talk, I think it was 2 days ago, Bing Maps is powered by OSM data in several countries. And so how does this look like? So we had this button here. It's actually on the Bing Maps Bing.com/maps. And so in some countries, we showed this button. And so this was our entry point. And so once user would click the button, he would go to the Map Builder web app, which is hosted on the link bing.com/mapbuilder/. And so an announcement is that we plan to sunset this project. In other words, shut it down in 2 days. And so I see this opportunity here today to basically share our learnings with you all and to sort of open some of our designs and in general to do a summary of what the product attempted to do and what were some key results. I mean, what's the point of that? I think the point of that is to empower new developers to do their own editors and to either not make the mistakes that we made or to do the things that we saw were effective. Okay. So what is the key challenge that Map Builder was trying to solve? So again, we start from the users, and the users are Bing users that have no prior mapping experience whatsoever. They've actually are probably using Bing Search or Bing Maps, which are more of a sort of consume-based product. So you search something and then you get result and then you follow the links, etc. While editing is something that requires more time, it's sort of more heavy and requires stronger interaction between the device and the user. And so the question is, how do you onboard these users? How do you develop them into becoming regular OSM contributors? And so the solution are following. So you need to have UI that's simple and minimal, because if you have something that's complex, you might, we could say, scare them off, but essentially with them being sort of used to these consumer-first products, they would come here and they would see all of this complexity, and you have a strong chance that they would immediately go away. And so we need to sort of ease into this process and sort of onboard them in this complexity step by step and gradually. And so this was one of our solution pillars. And so another one is, and I will talk about this in quite a detail is how do you actually educate them? So if they don't know how to edit OSM, then the question is like, how do you provide this knowledge, this information, these instructions? And so what we did is we actually did this via the paradigm that we called learn by doing. And we will see this in more details that we actually didn't want to introduce some elaborate tutorial at first, but we wanted to sort of have user do what they intended to do, and then we would sort of teach him while he's doing it. Finally, we will share like our drawing and editing tools, and we will also see the two approaches that we had and why we opted for the one that is more step-by-step and more streamlined, and 2 points and how we sort of, I think someone mentioned this, I think it was in the OSM Future panel, like that mapping should be fun. And so I will share here like what was our simplistic approach to this and how to sort of make this more engaging and more fun so the users would actually come back and we would have some retention. And finally, we wanted to emphasize this fact that mapping is with and for a community, and I will show some features of how we managed to do so. Okay, so let's go with the, I think maybe most important point. And so this is onboarding and educating users. And so as mentioned, we were considering this approach of having this sort of more elaborate tutorial where user, when he comes to the map builder, he would actually like learn some of the OSM terminology, how to draw, etc. And so we considered calling this sort of introductory tutorial. And we realized that the downside of this is you have this step, and this step is not so simple. And so especially for the users that came to Map Builder and they have a strong intent. So for example, you can imagine on Bing Maps, they saw a road and they saw that there is a name missing, or maybe their directions or navigation was wrong. And so they clicked the button that is called Edit Maps, and then we actually keep this context, and this is important, like we keep the viewport where they're on, and now they can see the OSM layer, and in the OSM they can, for example, see this road and see this name. And so if we were to have some sort of tutorial that would be pre-prepared, then that means that we are changing this context. So that means that, for example, someone clicks something like start a tutorial, but then he ends up in this sort of new place, and then we expect him to map this, and of course we can do it really well because this can be basically mocked or stubbed data. And so what we observed is we actually implemented something like this. We implemented a really simplistic tutorial, but what we observed is that this must be explained really well, and for some users they don't understand this, and so they don't like this context switch that is happening. And so our experiments showed that like even having this simplistic tutorial didn't have like a strong impact nor on data quality nor on this conversion rate, meaning how many users visited and then how many contributed in the end. And so, of course, we could argue that, for example, if we were to make something more elaborate, then the data quality would be better. But we actually decided to focus our efforts in a different approach. And a different approach is we would actually teach the user while he's doing something that he intended to do. And so the 2 bullets here is educating users while they're making the edits that they intended to make. And it goes furthermore than this. And this is not something that's specific to Map Builder. This is also, I think, how the OSM in general works. So you would educate users even after they have made a change. That, so for example, they make a change and then they submit it, and then someone can comment either from our editorial team or from the OSM community and say, hey, we have reverted this change, or hey, this could have been done better, and so on. And so this is also the moment when they actually get educated on how to do further edits. And so I will show now like the images of the approach that we actually implemented, and it was final for us. And this is like learn by doing. So as an example here, like there is a road missing, right? And so user clicks on a button, add new, and I will talk about this more later, and then selects he wants to add a road. And so he's in this mode now that's called add new road. And you can see like basically there are 3 instructionary or learning sort of designs here implemented. So one is like you have this tooltip that you know what's the next action. It's like click on the map to start drawing something. And then you also have, this is a GIF, by the way, that is like showing you how to do this road connection. And it actually emphasizes also that the road should be connected to another road. And there is also the instruction here on how to do so. So again, this principle, while the user is drawing the road that he might have intended to do, we are teaching him how to do this. And we can have like further tooltips on click again for the next point, or even actually that would be harder to implement, like, but click the connection point. But it could be also doable. And so once the user adds a road, then he goes into this sort of, I would call it mode or state where he should now populate the attributes. And I think this is like pretty much standard for most of the editors. And now, for example, he's choosing a road type, and we have simplified these options here. And so, for example, we can see like there are a few types. And again, while he's selecting this type, we are explaining what the type actually means. So, for example, he's looking at the driveway, and so driveway, it says it's short private road leading to a house or garage, and so there is also an illustration here. And so we can look, before we go into this left part, we can also look at the example on the right, and this is this moment of someone educating users after the actual submission. And so user submitted something from Map Builder, and then someone from our own Microsoft editorial team commented, hey, I reverted your change set because this and this. And then user responded something like, I appreciate it, and said, I attempted to do this. Then Microsoft sort of editor replied something like, hey, to do that, you can just select this sort of drop box, and then you can choose a type, and so on. And so we had like a few examples of this actually happening. And now for the main part, what were the results of this? And so we can see a graph here, and on the x-axis, I think that's how it's called, we can see the user seniority. So this means user that made at least one change set, user that made at least 100 change sets, and so on. And we can see the percentages of good change sets based on that. And so we were only looking at these change sets that are like free-form change sets, and a good means good or slightly adjusted. And so what this means, like we have an editorial team, as I mentioned, and they would judge actually these submissions. And so they would either say this is good with slight adjustment, or this is reverted. And so we can see the results essentially of these judgments. So this doesn't mean that, for example, all of the not good change sets went directly into the OSM. Most of these were sort of apprehended by our editorial team, and the Map Builder has actually made significant investments into this validation system. So in us figuring out sort of whether some change set is good or bad before it actually goes to in OSM, and even if it goes to the OSM, then our editors would look it up. Or if, for example, it takes some time, maybe like it's weekend and so on, then someone from the community would actually react. And so I don't want to focus that much on validation system. I wanted sort of to focus on the UX, but you'll feel free to ask any questions afterwards. And so what are some of our learnings? So we had a learning that actually the likelihood of developing this single contributor to, let's call it power user, someone that has more than 100 change sets, was something like 1 in 500. And even when we have this sort of power user, you can see that he has something like 70% good change sets, which of course in the OSM community, like usually the more senior and power users have something like 100. And so our biggest learning is that actually this is a really hard problem to solve. And like by problem, I mean converting someone with no prior map experience to top quality, at least with the approach that we proposed here, meaning we have this UI and we have this sort of learning method and so on. And like it really takes like a dedicated team and like a multi-year investment in order to achieve this. We can see here that it shows some promise, but still like it would take more time in order to do this, and probably some more elaborate like education mechanisms, tutorials, and so on. Okay. I also wanted to briefly talk about how to actually add an object and what we sort of considered in Map Builder. So there is this, like, I think it's basically ID approach, which is you can first choose to add point light on or area, and then you can draw, and then you actually select the type, right? And so the question is, for the new users that don't have any expertise with mapping, is this intuitive? And so we were like, well, we can also look at another approach, in which is user first decides that he should add something, and then user selects the type. And so you can see how we placed it here, like we have some most common types, and then user actually draws the type. So once he, for example, selects building, he would be in this add new building mode, and he would draw the building. And so the difference is that here user actually selects a specific type before he actually does the drawing. And so to answer to these questions, we had some results on this, and the results indicated that it was much more likely that user would actually click on point line area, and our assumption is, and actually start drawing, and our assumption is because he didn't quite understand what the sort of buttons mean. And while this is true, like for the approach B that I showed, where you select first the specific type and then you do the drawing, we actually had 2 times higher success rate. And success rate is like, for example, from click to actually submitting something. And so this is why we actually kept the approach B. After someone draws, he would get the attribute panel. And so an interesting question here, like again, for the users that don't have prior mapping experience, like are OSM tags user-friendly? And so the question is probably not. I mean, they're elaborate and they require a certain learning curve, but the fields are friendly. And by fields, I mean fields like this, and also there are like some fields in ID. And so now the question is, which fields do you want to expose? And I think this is really a balancing act, because you don't want to expose everything, as it would create something that in the sort of UI world is called cognitive overload. So you have too much information, not sure what to do next. And so again, if we were to go with this pillar, we want UI that's simple and minimal. What we decided to do is we decided to have sort of map builder and have map builder sort of lens, where we observe all of the OSM objects, but you can actually edit and view only some attributes. And some attributes are the attributes that we thought are most important, and actually we also referenced this tagging info and so on, and we saw that these tags are mostly used. And so, for example, in this road, you can see here that we decided to expose the type, the name, the surface, and for example, for surface, we are not exposing the drop-down immediately. We think that even paved unpaved signal is good enough. So first, someone selects this checkbox, and then he would get the sort of drop down based on this. And we also decided to expose access, and this is especially for the service roads, and like, of course, for driveway, we would actually default to select the private access. Okay, mapping is engaging. And so what we actually observed is that we had sort of an enquete or an explicit feedback. And we saw that 1/3 of our users that actually sort of responded to this mentioned that they have a clear intent to edit something. But that means that 2/3 of them said they were just exploring the app. And so this is interesting, and we thought, well, how can we sort of hit this intent as well? And so what we decided to do is we decided to have these challenges. And challenges are something really similar to what Street Complete is doing. And so you would have pins on the map, and once you click on the pins, you would actually get an assisted sort of flow where you can add something, and we even had like edit something as well in something that we added like a few months ago. And so this idea that, again, this is something like a combination of what Rapid is doing as well. So we sort of know the geometry in advance, but we're not sure that that's the correct geometry. So we essentially ask user, we didn't want to go to this route that user would just be able to accept it. We actually wanted him to draw it. But our learning was that this is not that easy to explain. It's actually really hard, because even when I tell it to myself, it's something like, you have this geometry, but we're not sure that that's the geometry, so you should confirm it to us and draw on top of it, or draw it appropriately if this is correct, or you can actually skip and essentially report this part. And so this has to have some sort of learning moment on its own. And like, it has to be really carefully, this is this bullet here, it has to be really carefully designed so it doesn't overlap with the freeform editing, meaning user wanting to add a building on its own when he knows where it is, right? this is something that is like assisted. Our final learning is that with these challenges, we were actually more likely to create these users that are something like chair mapping power users, and these users were less likely to provide local knowledge. And so someone would basically do a lot of these challenges, and then he wouldn't provide any local knowledge, or very little of it. And so if we were to continue with this, we definitely would have sort of introduced some mechanisms on pushing the users a little bit to do various sort of things. So for example, you do the challenges, but also like do the freeform editing and providing local knowledge, which we think is more valuable. Mapping is fun. And this is like a solution principle we tried to implement. And the way we did it is we introduced these levels. And like this is a really sort of simplified way of what we did. And sort of after someone contributes, we would actually give him a badge. And the badge reflects on how much he's helping the community. And so our learning was that introducing this feature increased the conversion rate by 45% from users with first edit to users with 5 edits, for example. And I think this was a success, but the learning was also that this flow needs to be prominent and it needs to be in line with the main flow of the application. So that means we cannot just sort of reward badges for some random stuff. It has to be connected with this flow and it has to be prominent. Like once you make a contribution, you should get this screen and it should say something like, hey, you got a badge and so on. And then someone looks and sees, actually in this case, user has all the badges, but if he doesn't, these two would get something like pending and like expected to do, and so this would motivate users to achieve more. And finally, mapping is with and for a community, and so for this we added a couple of features. The feature for user to view his own change sets, so this is something that we call that history, and for user to view the change set near him, so this is called the recent activity. And also user can sort of view, when he views any change set, he can actually place a comment or he can receive a comment from the community. And that means that user would be reachable. And as I previously talked about, this is also an educational moment. So someone commenting and saying, hey, this could be done better. And then like a user doing this. And so our learning was that actually commenting was very rare. So something like 100 daily change sets, maybe a few, maybe 1 or 2. And for social features to become used, which is in a way what we're calling this set of features, there needs to be a really strong community of returning users that would actually sort of use this and so on. And so some of the features, we think we actually did it like before their time. And finally, I want to share a few things about mobile map editing. And so we actually didn't plan to sort of over-invest in this, but we had this sort of flow where someone would get the comment, and then we also, for some users, based on their preference, we would send the email of this and this. Someone would get notification, and then we would send these notifications in the emails based on user preference. And some of these were like someone commented on your edit, or your edit has gotten 200 views on big maps, and so on. And so what we observed is that users mostly view the emails on mobile, which is not surprising. But 60% of the emails with link click, meaning someone gets an email and then clicks on one of the CTA buttons, he would actually land at the mobile. And so we thought, okay, this is an important thing to do. But furthermore than that, of course, mobile experience is important because someone can just carry their mobile and they can map their local surroundings. And so we thought, like, let's do a responsive design and let's see, like, whether we would get some results. And how this looks like, and I would like to share, like, some more, this is more UI and design approach. So we have this sort of how we did this layout, as it's called, or skeleton. So we have this side panel that's on the left, but in the mobile, we just thought, let's just bring it to become this bottom sheet. And so user can collapse it, expand it, whatnot, and essentially the functionality would mostly stay the same. One thing though is that drawing on mobile is hard. And so some colleagues are like, I have a huge thumb and I can't really hit the points in order to draw it by default. And so there are two approaches of how you can actually do drawing, which is something that we brainstorm in the design meetings. And so one of them is you can actually have the point that's centered, and then you can actually move the map by panning it, and then you press the button to add it. But another interesting approach that I'd also like to share is we sort of have this, I'm calling it thumb extension, but it's essentially a navigator, and so you can, the navigator and the point are sort of fixed. So you actually move the navigator, and the navigator moves the point, and then you can actually like press button to add points, but you're essentially, with this navigator, you're positioning them. And so, of course, after someone draws, then he would have, again, this sort of bottom sheet that would expand, and he can populate the attributes. And so this was some approaches we were considering for the mobile drawing. And so with the drawing being sort of harder thing to do, we were actually considering of giving a priority to challenges on the mobile. And so especially for the local challenges, since user can sort of go to his location, and then he can actually do a bunch of these challenges, and this is really similar to what Street Complete does. Yeah, that's it.